You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the hard to find sometimes live edition of Head, a Star Wars podcast. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for the show. So, yeah, it's been kind of crazy, I know, to catch us, but here we are. We're live. We have the second half of Tales of the Empire last week, and I think it actually was. Didn't we do this on Sunday last week too?
I believe so. Yeah.
I think we did. So last week we actually reviewed episodes 1 through 3, which talked about Morgan Elsbeth's storyline, and of course today we're doing 4 through 6, which is now talking about Barriss Offee's storyline. And we kick things off, of course. So Ted texted in. And he said, looking forward to this one tomorrow on the replay. So he's not going to be able to join us live. Sometimes he'll actually chat in before the show goes live and let us know. He thinks it was a great 3-episode story with more to come, and I'm happy about that. So, yeah, I think that this is actually something that's encouraging. David comes in. Hello, gentlemen. I can't wait to discuss this. It was great.
Yeah, he's got some interesting things he wants to bring up.
Well, that's good. This is a place to do. You know, it's funny because before I watched this episode, I was a little skeptical because I wasn't sure. Like, people were actually saying, "Oh, I expected more out of this," and you know, it was almost like it was tempering some of my expectations, which I tend to do anyway because you know you have to with these things, and especially with how 1 through 3 was given to us, like the whole Morgan Elsbeth, as we talked about last week. We really don't know if we needed to focus on her. Mm-hmm. And there were some issues. Like, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't really all that great. Like, it had potential. This one, this is a little bit more, I think, on par with the Tales of the Jedi series. I think that this one, you know, it had some really concise. Again, I like the way that they broke up, you know, the 4, 5, and 6, right? With 4, she's kind of taken. She joins the Empire, gets a little bit of training, and then in 5, she's then on her first mission and gets disillusioned. I mean, it's definitely an abbreviated thing, right? I mean, you can't really expound on the story like you can, say, in the Bad Batch, where you got like 15 episodes or something. And then, of course, in the final episode, you know, then she's actually, you know, helping like what would be a youngling if the Jedi actually still existed in their form, and she has to protect it. So I mean, it was an abbreviated story arc, but I thought it was good.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think this was way better than the Morgan Elsbeth thing. This is more, like you said, on par with Tales of the Jedi. This is it was a better story. It was more concise. It had gravity to it. It had a lot of different. It had a couple of different twists. You know, I didn't expect Barriss to kind of go back into being, you know, more Jedi-like. You know, I didn't expect her to resist the whole Inquisitor program. There's only one thing I can really say off the top of my head. I mean, I know David kind of had some thoughts, but I think his thoughts is more on the administrative side of things. The only thing I would probably say is that I thought, although I love the fact that they brought Vader in, I think it was too soon, because it's like, all right, you know, oh, here's your new master. And it's like, he just like
he gave him like 2 lessons or something.
Well, not even that, but I'm just saying, like, the fact that like the timeline in which everything happened is like, okay, she just watched the temple burn, and now all of a sudden he's in the suit, he's walking around, he's comfortable, you know. It's like,
well, I don't know if that's, I don't know, and that's the thing. The timeline is a little fuzzy. I don't know if this is an immediate thing, or because they did seem to imply that a little bit of time had passed, but and you do have to get the Inquisitor program going a little bit quicker. And don't forget, the Inquisitors basically were fallen Jedi, so it's sort of like once you say, okay, you know, do you guys want to do this or do you want to be killed? And they opt for, doing this. It's not like you really have to train them per se. You just have to shift their focus to the dark side a little bit.
Yeah, and then the other thing is kind of, I always wonder about that because at what point, and we've kind of hinted at this before, when it came to Dooku, but like at what point does your eye color change? Like how evil do you have to get until that happens? Because Maul had it, Palpatine had it, of course Anakin had it. Now Anakin pretty much had his almost like instantaneously, it seemed. Like okay, 1 minute he's lopping off Mace's hands to save Palpatine, and then like within the same film, within the same day, you see how evil he is. And now granted, it could be because he just slaughtered a bunch of 9-year-olds.
I was gonna say
like
he did
that
kill all
probably
the younglings.
I'm like,
That
that might have
probably accelerated things. Yeah.
accelerated some things a little bit. So maybe that was it. But the thing is I've always wondered about the Inquisitors too, is because the ones that we could see their eyes, like even the Grand Inquisitor. Well, the Grand Inquisitor's eyes are yellow, but like for someone like Barriss or Lynn who was with them, like their eyes hadn't changed yet, and it's do they get to a certain point where that happens, or is that just like really when you become a Sith Lord? Am I making sense?
Yeah, no, and I think that's
Like what level of evil do you have to
right, and
before that
is that
happens?
only a Sith thing or is that a dark side thing?
Right.
Speaking of these type of characters, General Grievous 19 says hello. He is one of our recent subscribers, by the way. So we want to thank everybody who has subscribed. We crossed the 10,000 threshold. We're like at 11,000 some subscribers. So hopefully more of them become engaged. I mean, I'm not saying I necessarily want like 10,000 people chatting at once. That could get a little messy, but we're building up a nice community. So it is nice when somebody subscribes and then they, decide to actually engage right away, like General Grievous did. So we're very happy about that. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a Sith trait. I don't know. I never even really looked that up, but I think it is a Sith trait. And it's interesting because, as you pointed out, Dooku's eyes never yellowed. But I wonder if that's what you're alluding to, though, because he wasn't 100% evil, really. He did a lot of evil things, but I don't think he was as consumed by the dark side. Because remember, his reasons for doing it were really more political than, I'm trying to dominate.
Personal.
Yeah. And he did do some things. I mean, if you watch the Clone Wars and everything, and the way that he handled Asajj and all that, I mean, he was pretty dark too, but maybe not to that degree. And then speaking of which, I mean, this thing did go in some dark places. I mean, when Lynn just slaughtered that whole village, and
man, yeah, that was because she got it definitely reminded me of shades of the Obi-Wan series.
Well, it reminded me of that, but it also reminded me of when Anakin went and took out Newt Gunray and all those guys.
Yeah.
When he basically shut and locked the doors and
Yep.
I mean,
now we're gonna have tryouts. It's almost like it's like the Joker just walked in. But yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed this, episode. I think the choice that, because she's stuck in the room with it's just not just Barriss, but it's like 2 other Jedi or former Jedi. And they're trying to, contemplate about and I know this is one of David's issues, was that he was kind of complaining that both of these, for the Tales of the Jedi, both featured women as the main character, which I'm like, it's Kathleen Kennedy, dude. I mean, it's kind of her thing.
Well, and then the bozo looking dude, he was a guy. But if you're talking about the ones that actually made it through, like it was Lynn and Barriss.
Well, I mean, just even at on the onset of it, you had like it was Lynn, Barriss.
And well, you had I forgot their names, but you had the one with the little bozo hair. He was a dude, and then
the
other one began with an A. The one that she had to kill, that was a guy.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I said. And that's what I was reiterating to David. I said, well, there were guys in it, and they were sort of main characters. But I get what he's saying. Like,
oh yeah, he's
but I think the one who decided to leave was like, no, I'm not sticking around for this. And I really, I almost wish that I would have saw what happened. Like, was he just cut down by Lynn? Was he cut down by the Grand Inquisitor, or was it like a bunch of stormtroopers or clone troopers at that point? Or were a bunch of clone troopers? How did that actually fare? I mean,
Yeah.
well, we know how it fared. We just
Well,
don't
yeah,
see how it
right.
got there. You know what I mean? um,
Well, and I think they wanted to keep a little bit of that,
the
that
mystery.
mystery going, right? Where it's like
Hmm.
it's crossing them, and your imagination is going to do all the work. But I
Hmm.
mean, to address the female thing in this one instance, it doesn't bother me because the Barriss Offee thing, they're featuring her because of her story arc in the Clone Wars.
Yeah, it's
This
a
is,
continuation.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
exactly, it's a continuation, and it makes sense because of what her storyline was.
Hmm.
So that didn't bother me. And then, of course, bringing Lynn in. Lynn was a character in. I don't remember 100% like what she did, but I know she was an existing character though. And I don't remember if she had any history with Barriss though. I mean, I'm assuming so because they put her in there. But and of course, Barriss is was it Luminara? Who was her master?
Luminar Unduli.
Yeah. So you basically had a female Padawan with a female master, and now this female Padawan who had become more and more powerful as the Clone Wars continued, and then you had her whole thing to where she had betrayed the Jedi or whatever, and then was put in prison, and that's where we actually pick things up. And I think that in this case, given that story arc, this is the one time I'm going to say I don't think they were trying to do any agenda thing here. I think they were trying to say, okay, how does this work? Plus, it's a Filoni thing, isn't it? This is a Filoni
Well,
thing, right?
well, the Barris story, I don't have a problem with. I think what I was referring to is the fact that you had Barris and Morgan as the features for Tales of the Empire, like
Oh, I see. For the whole,
yeah, for the whole thing. And I think that was his big gripe, which I understand, like, but that's why I had to reiterate it's a Kathleen Kennedy film.
yeah. Even though I don't know, I think that I honestly think. Well, let me just say this: General Grievous basically says there were some dark moments in those episodes. Yeah, there were some really dark moments. Even more so, I think, than the Morgan Elsbeth one. This one had some seriously, from the killing of the one guy who decided to walk away from the whole thing, and he knew that was going to happen. I mean, they weren't going to just be like, you know,
Well, it actually had shades of Thanos and uh and they was like, he had the whole firing squad and he was trying to distract her by that little knife that he had,
oh yeah,
and he told her to turn away and play with the knife while he gave the order to basically slaughter her entire village. So that's kind of what happened, in this situation where Barris kind of saw that kid and she was just like, don't look back, just focus on something else. And she was just going to town on people, man. I mean, she just just ripped through the little crowd of people. And it's because, and you hear her, she's just like, they have to maybe made to understand that they can't screw with us. Like it's about making a point.
yeah, and I
And
like that. I
yeah, me
actually
too.
like the fact that they did that, where it wasn't like a Kylo Ren, this woman is just
Just
unhinged, or
just spastic, she
yeah, or even because I mean Vader kind of has that same logic, but it seems like Vader and Palpatine take a little bit more glee into the whole thing. I think, whereas Lynn, it was almost like she had turned evil but didn't really know it. Like she's still thinking strategically and just thinking that, hey, this is for a greater good almost.
it's the price of doing business. It's kind of like, it's almost like, if a cop pulls you over and it's like, look, if you just be honest with me, this can go a lot easier for, but if I find out that you're lying to me, then, now I'm just going to write you the ticket or maybe even take you in. I think that's kind of like almost the comparison I would use in this situation where, and I don't, I think even if they still gave up the Jedi, I mean, it probably would have happened anyway. That's the only unfortunate thing. Like, I
Yeah, I
don't think
wonder
there was,
that. I
and
wonder
that's the
that
thing,
too.
with her, like, you really don't know if it really, because you see it from some characters, it doesn't matter what your answer is going to be, they're going to wipe you out anyway. But with Lynn, it was almost kind of like you said, it was more calculated, more strategic. It's more like, hey, if you just bow to our will, I'll leave you alone. But because you want to buck up against the basically the natural order of things right now, I got to do my job, and I got to make you guys understand, like, okay, you can't screw with us like this because we're not playing.
Well, and
And
she even alludes to that a little bit. The first, like, don't you guys understand? We're trying to protect you. We're trying, she's
yeah,
actually in a way in the beginning of that whole thing pleading with them, like, listen, we're trying to be,
cool.
cool about this whole thing. It would have been nice though to have seen that, like you said, if there was a scene to where they had given him up or something like that. Because I mean, if they just said, "Hey, look, they're in the mountains. We're not trying to be a part of this," like one of those type of deals. It would have been interesting to see if she would have spared them, just because I think that that would have maybe emphasized the point. However, I think that they were doing that just by saying, "Okay, we're gonna have her plead and say, look, you guys just need to give these people up. They're a dangerous, group anyway. We're trying to protect you. Just do this and everything is cool." I think we're meant to just take her at her word at this point.
Yeah.
And then when they didn't do it, that's when it comes and, it's like, okay, well, for the greater good, we had to do this. Okay, so now David writes, I love coffee in the last episode. Is he talking about Offie?
Yes.
But she wasn't in. Oh, in the last episode
He
of this arc.
likes
Okay,
he
yeah, I know
loves
he
calling
loves
up
to
her
do
name.
that. That's great. I love it, and the fact that she has darker skin's awesome too, and how she was physically superior to the other chick and superior in philosophy. The Grand Inquisitor was Phi. Loved his design and his stature. He's a beast in the ring. And one of the things I'm glad you brought that up because one of the things I thought was a really cool juxtaposition. Did you
Mhm.
notice how in the last episode she was now fighting like the Grand Inquisitor against her in the first one?
Mhm.
It's
But
and that was a way of saying, "Hey, now I'm the
yeah.
powerful one here."
Well, it was a couple of things in that. One, the very first time when she squared off with the Inquisitor, it was very Vader like. She's like, "What, you unarmed?" See, it reminds you of that scene when Vader was fighting Fifth Sister in the Obi-Wan Kenobi
Oh yeah.
scene when and Vader barely even drew his lightsaber. Just showing you how powerful he was with the Force. Um, so I love that, and they just showed how much of a novice, and he kept tell us, "Stop trying to fight like a Jedi. You're predictable. You're all of this." And so then now, like, to your point, Eric, the juxtaposition of now, Barriss has gotten to the point where, you know what, I don't even need to bring out and I can actually, because I know your training now. And see, that's the beautiful part about that, is that she knows both. So now she
Right.
knows
And they
kind of
turned it
like,
around. It's like, your whole
yep.
like little dark side thing is so predictable basically.
Hmm.
And I could do it. It's almost like that quit fighting like a Jedi. The Grand Inquisitor was trying to imply that the Jedi style was the weaker one. Now she's going, no, 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 this dark side version is weak. So that was a really cool thing that I thought that they did. That was really interesting to me.
Yeah, I honestly, and that whole cave thing, Star Wars is always notorious for doing things like that with like these
Always got to have a
caves
cave
and
or something. Yep.
or something that's got to screw with you. And I thought, it was kind of cool though, like how peaceful and serene Barris was in that last episode, to the point she's like, well, if you go in there, you're not going to make it out alive. It's just, and the fact that she was getting that Lynn was getting so frustrated because she couldn't figure it out, and her anger just kept swelling, which made her even more trapped within this cave, which I thought that was a nice,
That was different. That was
that was a
definitely a
nice,
different thing. Yeah.
yeah, it was a nice metaphor. I think that's what I want to use for like what's happening to her internally. Is like everywhere you're turning, because you're so angry, you're blinded by all of this stuff, and that's basically like what it was amplifying in her. Like no matter where you turn, you keep running into a wall, and you can't get around because you won't let certain things go.
Right. It was almost another way of saying, the dark side of the Force seems like it might be the quicker and easier path, but as much as these people think that they're super powerful, there's actually a lot of weakness in it. And this is, this is showing why. Because I think in a lot of cases, even under Lucas, although he was a little bit more balanced, but it was more subtle, it was easy, I think, if you were a casual viewer, to just walk away thinking that the dark side was more powerful because it had a more aggressive style to it. And I think one of the things that they're doing now that is just fascinating to me is how they're actually showing the true power of the light side. This is one of the reasons why it's so powerful. David said, "This is Woman, Thou Art Loose Star Wars edition." All the men were evil or cowards. All the women were strong and brave. I hated the old man being so cowardly and needing a woman to tell him to man up. Well, I mean, kind of, I guess. The Grand Inquisitor was still pretty powerful. Vader was still pretty powerful.
Well, that's why you say evil or they were cowards.
But you know what? The evil or cowards, don't forget Lynn. Lynn was, and she was a woman. I really think in this one instance, and again, look, I'm usually one of the first, anybody that's watched this show more than a couple of weeks knows that I'm very sensitive to the whole social justice agenda being shoehorned into every project.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, David, I think you'll enjoy when we eventually review The Acolyte, because I have no doubt in my mind
that's
going to be extremely shoehorned. And I just don't know yet from the trailers if it's enough. Like, it'll be obvious, but I don't know if it's going to be enough to actually take away from the story. Like, if you divorced yourself from it mentally, could you still just go, okay, I'm just going to look at this story and see how it is, and maybe it's okay. However, if it's actually done in such a way to where it's forced and it makes the story disjointed or whatever, there's going to be a lot of fury because they just seem so determined to destroy every Star Wars project with a lot of this stuff. And lazy storytelling or, just bad decisions. And there's no excuse for it. That's the problem. In this case, though, I really honestly think that this is just a function of the natural story. I didn't really get any vibes that they were really trying to emphasize any agenda in this one. But I don't necessarily blame people for reading into it just because we've gotten it so much that you're almost trained to look and see, all right, what crazy message are you all trying to, cram down my throat now? All right, which one is the LGBTQ character, right? I mean, it's just your mind is going there now because for some reason they seem determined to do this, and they're doing that in The Acolyte. It's actually being nicknamed the queer Star Wars show or whatever. And you're just like, why? But in this, I think it is a natural extension because, like I said, Barriss Offee, if you go look at her storyline in the Clone Wars, this is very much a follow-up to that. And Lynn's character, I don't remember if she actually appeared in the Clone Wars or Rebels or any of that or not. But I do know that she was at least meant to be, like an established character. Even if she hadn't been featured in anything, she was definitely around. She was definitely there. I just don't remember if she didn't appear. We should look that up. We should look up and see if she appeared in anything, like animated or novels or comics or whatever. The name sounded familiar, but I'm not 100% certain. So I really think that it's just an extension of that. They didn't underpower the Grand Inquisitor or anything like that. So I don't necessarily think that it's like a getting carried away with any kind of an agenda.
Yeah, I mean, I I didn't see a whole lot of agenda. I mean, I could see it as far as the overall season of this when you have Morgan coupled with Barris. To that degree, I could kind of see that a bit because I feel like Morgan's story was forced.
Well, but again, though,
However,
I don't necessarily. Let's put it this way: I could see a benefit of the doubt situation with that, only because Morgan features so prominently in the follow-up series that I think they were just trying to lay groundwork.
and even if that is the case, which it could very well be, as I mentioned, because they've done so much, it's kind of hard to ignore it. Because now when you're trying to do something, and that's the problem with that, it's like when you're trying to do something legitimate and cool, it's almost like, when they tell you don't lie, because like when you really want to tell the truth, no one's going to believe you. So
Right.
like, that's the same way that we feel with this. It's like, okay, even if there is the shadow of a doubt, a benefit of the doubt, I should say, of it wasn't intentionally trying to push an agenda. It because they've done it so much, it just falls right into it because it has the symptoms of it. Even though it might not be the flu, it's just a cold, but it has the symptoms of one. And that's um I think that's why, David kind of feels the way that he does. And but I mean, I think overall though, like with the story though, I think it was great that, we saw Barris questioning Lynn often, like, okay, all right, they're unarmed. They don't like, why are we doing this? And then for Lynn to kind of counteract with like the black and white, she took feelings and emotions out of it and just looked at the black and white moment and said, hey, these people we're trying to protect, they're not following orders, they're not following directions. We have to keep these people in line. Otherwise, we don't have an empire because, everybody's kind of like able to do what they want to do. And we have to, keep that in check. So I really like that aspect, especially the second, like I said, the second episode. I think that would have been a better time to bring Vader in my opinion, as well.
Yeah, but I see what they were trying to do. And I mean,
I do too, but I think it would have made a little bit more sense to bring Vader in on the second episode.
if they were going to do another training thing. I think part of the problem is they were trying to deal with, okay, let's do the training and getting her into it in the first episode. Let's have her on a mission on the second episode. And then on the third one, she had just left, and now she has to face her former adversary. It's almost like an Obi-Wan type of a thing in that sense. So I think that's where they were going with that. And then to your other point, it's very much like that, where I can understand the sensitivity to it because, like you said, I mean, look, it's just like if we get fever and chills, you got to take a COVID test. Might not be COVID, but it kind of looks like it, so you have to take it, right? So I could see where people might think that an agenda is in there. I just don't think that it's there in this case. But
it's not as prominent. I put it to you though, it's not as prominent as we've seen it in other depictions. However, I think there is a slight undertone of it though.
there could be, but again, this is a Filoni thing. And Filoni's stuff has been pretty much free of that. Filoni doesn't care about agendas.
No, but we know Kathleen does, and
She will not, she leaves Filoni alone. Except when it comes to live action. She never messes with them with the animation. It's always the live action. And so I think that that's where you're getting a little bit of this from. I honestly think that with just featuring these two, the Barriss Offee thing makes sense because, again, it was a follow-up to a Clone Wars story. The Morgan Elsbeth thing, because she features so prominently in a lot of the future storytelling, I think they just wanted to give a little bit more backstory and a little bit more weight to all that. Now, of course, I still think that was a horrible decision. I just don't think that there was an agenda behind it. See, there's two things that Lucasfilm does. they either display complete ineptitude when it comes to making these kind of decisions, or they're trying to cram an agenda in, or a little bit of both. You know, in this case, I think they just were kind of, they just completely dropped the ball. Because again, we didn't need the Morgan Elsbeth story any more than we needed Solo, a Star Wars story, although that ended up being okay. Grievous says, the animation for sure was great. I love the Clone Wars style animation. And that's another good point, too. Especially because this is a continuation of a Clone Wars story.
Yeah, I mean, the animation has always been kind of key, and then of course, they get really good voice actors
Oh, yeah.
to embody these characters, you know. And I think that's a lot of times that's kind of understated. But I mean, without that, you know, these characters really don't come to life as well as we like. Um, but I mean, like as far as story wise, though, and I think that's one of the things that you know, um, out on the onset, you know, when she's like seeing the temple blowing up, and she's like, "What's going on?" And the troopers kind of walk by, like, "Well, you better be lucky you're no longer considered a Jedi anymore."
That was a great
You
line.
know, I was just like, I was like, "All
It kind of
right,
worked in your favor this time.
yeah, exactly." Um, but then, of course, like you know, they go see the Grand Inquisitor, and then they put in that whole little test that they had to go through, where they were in that little ray shielded tube, and they kind of had to duel it out. You know, it's just it's pushing that envelope. It's making them, you know, you're making them malleable to the point where it's like, okay, now I can bend you at my will and have you start to do the things, even though she know. And it's crazy because you kind of almost gonna want to wonder, like, did she have a moment of clarity being in that cell, realizing what she had done?
Mm-hmm.
Because the whole reason why she was in there, because she betrayed the Jedi Order, and then later on, you know, when she becomes an Inquisitor, she's fighting against the remnants of that very same order. And then even how she appealed to that young guy, like, you know, aren't you tired of running? You know,
Mm-hmm.
just give it up, you know. And then she's like, well, we almost had him. Like we didn't almost have to resort to violence. We could have just helped dealt with this a different way. And you know, Lynn is like, mm-mm, it's got to be this way or no way. So I just really like the dynamic play between the two of them, because you know you have both of them with strong ideas about how things could be done, and ultimately Barris doesn't have the authority like Lynn to command certain things, so she's kind of got to trying to find ways around it, or try to get, you know, people out of the situation, which made the last episode so cool, because she's just like, you know what, take my ship. Even she accepted her fate, like, okay, you know what, I might not make it out of here, I probably
Yeah.
won't. You know, and that was just like, once again, like, wow, you see the unselfishness of the Jedi, like that Jedi-ness came back, you know, to her. And, you know, she had, like I said, she had a different type of peace. She was very serene. Um, and you know, I just really love the evolution of that character.
And think about it. They did that in just 3 episodes.
Right.
Like, there was a better arc and evolution of this character than, say, the Ahsoka series. You know, or some of the other stuff where or like Boba Fett, for instance. You know, I mean, it blows my mind. Before I forget it, too, you had mentioned the voice acting. I also wanted to compliment the music in this whole thing, too. They really
Mhm.
nailed that almost prequel era type of music, you know, mixed in with the way that it's just naturally evolving into what it is. Because I think that's really important, simply because of something that you just said earlier. And that is that you have a situation where you're trying to show this thing where, first of all, we finally get to see what Inquisitor training is like. You know, that's something that we hadn't
Mhm.
really seen before that we were curious about, and how that's handled. You also have something that you were talking about where she had betrayed the Jedi, but she was still somewhat of a light side user, then of course the Grand Inquisitor was able to bring out some dark side in her, and then she begrudgingly accepted her fate, which is something that I think that is a really fascinating thing for them to continue to point out if they're going to keep focusing projects in this era. And that is, not everybody is privy to what the Empire is doing, first of all. So you have that. You basically have like 3 types of citizens at this point. You have the ones where they're just like, well, all right, it was the Republic, now it's the Empire. All right, the armor on the troopers looks a little different. Ships maybe look a little bit different, but okay, whatever. I don't care. You know, we're living our life on this planet. It's not affecting us. I mean, how many times have you seen that where they always say, well, you know, the Empire leaves us alone, so we don't care. They don't oppose them. And then, of course, it's usually later on in whatever episode that is that the Empire does come. But that's one type. The second type that you get is where it would swing, you know, the other way, where you get the people like Leia and Bail Organa and all these other people, Mon Mothma, where they know exactly what the Empire is doing, and they know all the ins and outs of it, and they had to try to convince the rest of the public. But then you have people that are in Barriss Offee's case. Now, of course, she swings a little bit more towards that I know what the Empire is doing thing, but plus or minus, you basically have this middle ground where they go, look, you know, it's not perfect, but there's no point in fighting it. You know, just go with it. And it was interesting to see her story arc because that's where she was, even to your point, when she was fighting that younger Jedi. And she was like, aren't you tired of running? Aren't you tired of, you know, it's just like, it's real easy. All you got to do is just go with the flow here and everything will be fine. But then she's...
Okay.
Well, I was just going to say she's starting to see, of course, the weakness in that. Because every time she tries to do that, then Lynn does something, you know, horrible and makes her question it. Like, really, dude? Come on, man. We didn't have to...
Is that necessary?
Right. Is that necessary? Let me see.
Good.
Well, we got some chats here. I should get to those. Ted Adam Green basically says, hey, guys, looking forward to this podcast and your thoughts as I enjoyed this character arc more than I thought I would. Thanks. Of course. David's like, the action was great. What did you all think of the quality of the story in the last 3 compared to the first 3? I thought the stories were better with the witch. Side note, she's a savage. Interesting. And then, of course, General Grievous chimes in on this, too. I'm kind of mixed about the story in those 3 episodes. I think the overall story makes sense, but it was not handled that well. Still good, though. And that's the thing. The Morgan Elsbeth storyline, even if you get past the argument that you probably didn't need the backstory, but if you just look at it on its own merit, forget that part. You and I both said the same thing in our review last week, that it wasn't like it was bad. It just didn't live up to its potential. And I think that that's the way you can sum up the first 3, is that it was okay, it just didn't live up to its potential. Whereas these three did live up to their potential. This is what we expected when we actually were starting to watch this.
Absolutely. You know, I think that's it's not just the action, but it's the overall story, the pacing, the direction. What story are they trying to get to? What's in the way? And that's the thing about like the Barriss story. It was very concise. It's like, okay, this is the situation. We're gonna get you here. We're gonna hit these beats. We're gonna give you some cool moments with Vader showing up, you know, in his grand glory, you know. But then we're gonna give you this awesome resolution where, you know, I didn't expect Barriss to die. You know, that was actually,
I know, I was surprised.
That was actually a surprise to me. But that's once again like great storytelling because, you know, you want your fans to kind of have to be on the edge of the seat. They not know.
And what's even funnier, she died by accident.
Exactly. That's
because I mean, Lynn wasn't even really trying to kill her. It was just kind of a reflex.
Yeah.
You know, thing like, oh, Oops. Because, I mean, honestly, when there's a couple of things that I could say here, too. When you saw that figure, that Kate figure coming up, I thought it was Vader at
Me
first.
too. Yeah, when it was in the distance, when she was like,
Yep.
"Yes," that's
Yep.
what I thought it was too. I was like,
That's why I
"Yeah."
thought it was over when
I
she
was
was
like,
like,
"Yeah."
see, I thought she saw Vader and was like, yeah, you know what? Don't wait for me. Go ahead and take the ship.
Yeah, because she already knows how this is gonna end.
Because, I mean, if it's Vader, you know you're going to die. I mean, there's
Yeah,
just like, she's just not powerful enough. So,
you ain't know Ahsoka.
and I'll even go one further. When you had said that, they should have waited to put Vader in there, maybe to episode 2, I don't think he should have been in there at all. I think what they should have done, because it's important and to keep the whole training thing in the first episode, because that's showing the training and all that stuff. The second episode, you're doing a mission. So it really wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. You have training, mission, and then sort of like an epilogue type of thing. Like after she left the whole Inquisitor thing.
Yeah, the
But,
compound. Yeah.
right. So what I think they should have done is maybe allude to the fact, maybe like name checking or something, and just say, okay, when you're ready, you'll be trained by Lord Vader himself, or something like that. Because, like you said, it was a little early. I mean, they had like 2 lessons, and all of a sudden, Vader's coming in. It's. I mean, granted, I guess I can understand if they wanted to imply that, hey, Order 66 had just happened, and we got to get more people on board to hunt Jedi. It can't just be Vader. So we're going to start with former Jedi. As long as we trap them and are able to turn them, then it'll be okay. And that actually makes sense. Although I was actually under the impression when they started out that it wasn't the Inquisitors originally, I don't think were made up of former Jedi. I could be wrong about that. I know it morphed into that later on, even before a lot of these TV shows came out. I just remember when they first brought up the Inquisitors, because if you think about it, that's sort of a plot hole too, right? Because Vader was training, if you go by the game canon, in Force Unleashed, he was training Starkiller sort of without Palpatine knowing it, to help overthrow him one day. Well, it's like, okay, you give Vader like all these Jedi guys, and it's sanctioned, and Vader's training them. What's to stop him from just creating his own little Jedi army and going up against Palpatine?
I just don't think that they're powerful enough, and I think
They wouldn't need to be. Vader himself would almost be, powerful enough to defeat him eventually, because the idea is, and I know what you're saying. You're saying, look, he needed somebody like a Luke or a Leia or somebody to join him, because if he had stayed as, Vader, like non-suit Vader, like essentially Anakin just turning to the dark side, then then he could have defeated him. But once he got into the suit, it hampered his powers enough that by himself he wouldn't be able to defeat him.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just what it is. I think they needed enough. You have to have enough skill level to do the job, but not too much to the where you think that you're talented enough to overthrow me. You know,
But if you think
it's
about it,
kind of like the 48 laws of power. You want to
right.
keep.
No, I
You
get
know,
that. But I mean,
mhm.
the thing that I'm thinking, though, is like, let's just say that he had trained. I don't remember in totality how many Inquisitors there were. I'm sure that answer is somewhere. The internet's a
Yeah.
beautiful thing. But if you actually, say, got 15 former Jedi, powerful Jedi, okay, just the sheer number of Force users plus Vader would be enough. Because eventually it would overwhelm him.
Yeah.
Even if they weren't, really highly trained, they could still do it. Now, you can also point to when Mace came with all those Jedi Masters and go, well, that didn't work. But that didn't work because they underestimated him, and they just, that was another, in some ways, it was kind of a plot hole, but they explained it by he was blocking the light side, so nobody really knew, like they didn't feel his presence. as a Sith
Not
Lord.
only not only that though, I mean, like, Palpatine is like one of the most powerful Sith Lords ever.
Mhm.
We can't discount, and it's like he moved, and like when you read the book, when they were saying like, he was moving almost like Superman speed.
Yeah.
They just weren't prepared for that because they're like, okay, here's an old guy, he's a Sith Lord, okay, he's a doddering old man, but it's like, no, this guy is the guy. It's like he's the John Wick of Sith, in a way. So it's just like
Now that would be cool. A John Wick Sith movie starring Palpatine.
yeah, there you go. Like that's pretty much who he is, and he's just like, all right, I'm just taking out everybody, and he's fearless. He doesn't care.
They killed his loth cat or something, and now
Yeah,
he's
right. Not his loth cat.
now he's going on
Yep.
some sort of a tirade. See,
Yep,
now
his
that I
loth
would pay
cat.
to see.
Yeah, his lost cat and his favorite shuttle, like when they took his
Yeah,
Mustang.
yeah, right, exactly. And he found it all like chopped up in a shipyard or something like
Yeah.
that. See, and that's another thing too. We always talk about genre films. You could do like a Jedi thing like that. If obviously using Palpatine might be a stretch, but you could just have a powerful Jedi figure. It doesn't have to be somebody well known, but you can make a John Wick style movie like that.
Yep.
In fact, it would actually be cool. Honestly, I would just call it Order 66. And it's like, okay, everybody tried to get that, and he's like hunting, like he's trying to get to Anakin and Palpatine, but he's being stopped along the way. I mean, I think that would be kind of cool, and then just do it in a John Wick style. It just shows that you could do that. I mean, I know David has his heart set on a Fast and Furious style movie.
It's funny because they go into the temple. Okay, no business is to be conducted in here.
Yeah,
You
right.
just have to.
Exactly.
But like the Senate room, you have to be, you gotta be cool.
Right. It's kind of like the hotel.
Yep.
Which would be cool because, you'd have all these bounty hunters and stuff like that. I mean, if you think about it, Star Wars really lends itself just by the nature of the characters.
Oh, yeah.
That they could easily do something like that. Maybe that's the way that you bring in somebody like Cal Kestis or, I don't know, like I think Dash Rendar was, I think, a pilot. I don't think he might have been a Force user.
Kip Duran.
Yeah, you could bring in somebody from the expanded universe like that, too. That would be interesting. Or, I forgot who it was that was in the book I, Jedi, because it was kind of a similar vibe, actually. So you could do something like that. I mean, there's just all kinds of potential that you can do with things like that. And that's why I think it's important with something like Tales of the Empire, and if they continue this series, if they do Tales of the Bounty Hunter, or Tales of whatever, then it's important, I think, to tell stories that are not just filling in canon plot points or something, like, oh, let's tell the story of Morgan Elsbeth or whatever. You could go in all these other different directions, and it would be world building. It would be answering questions or filling in plot points, but it would be doing it in a more interesting way if you did things like that.
Yeah, I would agree. What would you rate the episodes, like as a group, like the story as a whole? Like, what would you rate 4, 5, and 6?
Yeah, that's right. Because last week you ended up giving it like a 4 or something.
Yeah,
I think I gave it a 5. I said it was like right down the middle. This one I would actually give like an 8.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well. I was gonna give it an 8.
Definitely an 8 because it was solid. It was really good. There were just so many great things about it. And that is something, quite honestly, where I did have high expectations because it was continuing a story that was established in the Clone Wars and what was probably the best season of the Clone Wars too. So, you're continuing a story thread that is very, very prominent toward the end. For David, that would be like how Fast 10 actually continued the story from Fast Five. And Fast Five has long been considered one of the better real storylines, other than the
Yeah.
first two, of course.
Right.
But Five actually had like a really good storyline. So if you're going to continue that, you got to set the bar kind of high for that. And I think that that's what they did with this episode, and I think that they achieved it. So I would definitely, give this one an 8. The only reason why I wasn't giving anything higher is just because, there are stories that we have reviewed. There are things that we've reviewed where it's worthy of, the higher ratings. Like, you don't want to give everything a 9.
Right.
General Grievous says, Barriss is one of my favorite background Jedi in Legends, the Jedi healer. And that's another thing, too, is the fact that she definitely is in Legends in the old expanded universe as well. And obviously, she was a little bit in the prequels, I think. I don't remember if she actually... I think she appeared. I think she was like in Attack of the Clones with Luminara.
Maybe. Possibly.
I know she was in the Clone Wars cartoon, obviously, because that's what
animation. Yeah.
Yeah, man, I actually used the word cartoon.
I know.
I broke my own rule. That was bad. But yeah, I mean, it was one of those things where I thought that there's more depth there, and I think that really goes into what we were talking about with the Morgan Elsbeth thing. Like, there's a lot more characters. And for Kathleen Kennedy's benefit, there's a lot more female characters in the Star Wars universe that would be, I think, better suited for a storyline like that. Now, I remember I was talking to somebody and they're kind of like, well, why not somebody like Fennec Shand or something? I'm like, well, because if you think about it, this Tales of the Empire thing, they're trying to keep it Empire, probably somewhat Force-using centric or, central to the actual Empire itself. But, you could have done the chick from Andor. Cyril's like love interest. Deidre. So you could have done Deidre. That, I think, would have been a really interesting thing. Because now you could have given her some backstory.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I mean, or even
Sloane. I would have liked to have seen
Ray Sloane.
Yep. Sloane would have been nice because she's been a prominent character primarily in the books, but it would have been a good way to bring her into this, and it would have been a really great way to maybe fill in a little bit about what was she doing during this time in the Empire, because she's so prominent, or at least relatively prominent. I mean, she starts out at a captain, but still, I mean, she's somebody that's definitely within the ranks, and then, of course, goes up from there post Return of the Jedi. But it would have been nice to have seen, well, what was she doing here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that I think when they're making these, you have to, especially on the Empire side, because some characters, although we love them, it's like they may not require a backstory, like Mahdi or something like that. Like,
right?
We don't necessarily need to see that.
Exactly.
So, and it's a little bit like tougher. Like, I would have loved to almost, if they did Krennic or something like that, almost do like a smaller version of Catalyst.
Yep, they could have done that. They could have actually turned Catalyst into a 3-episode thing. Would have been a little abbreviated, but yeah. Well, but I mean,
or even Thrawn, like his beginnings and how he got into the Empire. That
they could have adapted that too.
Yeah,
which would have made more sense than Morgan Elsbeth. It's like, if you're going to fill in the storyline, then fill that one in. But I think it's because I think that's because Thrawn has those books and the comics and all that stuff. But the other women that I was talking about, it's like, like Mahdi, Mahdi's big claim to fame is he's choked out by Vader. I mean, he doesn't really, there's almost nothing to tell, where a lot of these women, besides the fact that, Kennedy herself would love that. I think that the other thing that it does is that it actually gives backstories or fills in some information from prominent characters that will then factor in later on. And
nobody cares about, Um, uh, crap, name just escaped me. But Morgan. Yeah, no one cares about Morgan. I mean, like I don't see anybody running like around like, "Ooh, I want to be Morgan Elsbeth for Halloween," or "Mommy, buy me that Morgan Elsbeth, toy." Like
You know
no one
what?
gives a
She
crap.
had the potential though, because when Ahsoka first faced her in that episode in episode 5 of Mandalorian season 2,
Hmm.
I was actually on board. I'm like, "Ooh, who's this one?" Because she's kind of powerful and she's got this Beskar staff, and I wanted to know more about her. And I was on board with her even through the beginnings of Ahsoka until she ended up just being like one of Thrawn's puppets or something. And then she died. I think that they really dropped the ball on what they could have done with that character, because the Night Sisters are actually formidable characters,
Oh yeah, see that.
and they're
I mean,
interesting. And that's
now
what she
I
was.
but see, I think I will probably want to see that, but we got enough of that kind of in the Clone Wars animation
Yeah,
for the
we
most
did.
part.
I mean, you don't
Um,
really need it, I guess.
yeah, exactly.
David says, I didn't have to force myself to watch it like Andor. I actually enjoyed it on its merits. I'd give it an A because it was fun to watch and it was a good, simple story of the struggle of the soul.
Exactly, and
Well,
that's
it's also
exactly
something that
what
you don't have to have any prior knowledge of, too, I think.
that too.
You could
Well,
enjoy it without that.
except for the fact of why she was in jail to begin with.
But they sort of... What I'm saying is, like, if you're a super casual fan and you have no idea, like, you've never seen any of it, now you'll enjoy it more if you have, like us. But if you're just coming into Star Wars and you just see it, they give you some context. They basically... I mean, you're right. They could have given a little bit more, I suppose, if they
Mhm.
really wanted to drive it home. Because in thinking about the episode, you did have to really know, why she was in jail. Because really, they basically were just like, well, be happy you're not a Jedi anymore or something like that. It's like, well,
Mhm.
why is she not a Jedi anymore? Why is she in jail?
Yeah, what
I
happened?
mean, yeah,
And why are we focusing on her? Like, what's so special of it? But if you knew
right.
her backstory, you'd be like, "Oh, okay, I get it now." Right?
Which is the thing that I really like that Filoni seems to do. It's time to stop catering to the casual fan. Let's not cater. That's why I was glad the comic book movies got away from that, but they got away from it too late.
Yeah.
And then, of course, in the case of Marvel, then they started just dropping the ball as far as the quality goes. But it always drove me nuts that every time they would tell a new Batman story, Superman story, Spider-Man story, we'd always have to get the origin again. And of course, their
Mhm.
excuse was, well, the casual. I'm like, these comics are like 60, 80 years old. Who doesn't know this by now?
Well, go
Number
back and watch
one,
the first one. There's that. Go back and watch one of the other ones if you like the
yeah,
first
or just,
Spider-Man if you want to know that.
or now just look it up.
Yeah,
I
that too.
mean, it's time if you're going to make these kind of movies, jump in. The comic book fans get it. If
And that's
people,
who they were made for, really.
right, but they would always have to do that. And it just always drove me nuts. And then they finally started to get away from that. Or like in the case of, I think it might have been the last standalone Hulk movie. I don't remember which one. But remember how they just went over
Did it
the
in
thing in
opening credit?
in the opening
Yeah,
credits, exactly.
yeah,
See, that's a
yeah.
way to do it if you want to, okay, catch
Mhm.
up the casual fan. Because I get it. They also want box office too. But there are enough full-blown comic book fans, at least ones that have the basics, that they could just release it and it'll do fine. It'll still make $1 billion. It's not,
Yeah, just the
like,
name alone.
boy, how did Spider-Man get his powers? It's like,
Yeah.
come on, man, just look it up. And if you
Right.
don't know, then, where have you been living?
You don't need to be watching this movie.
Exactly. And so I'm glad that they're starting to do that with Star Wars a little bit too. Like, now we're going to actually make some things for the not even super hardcore fans, but harder core fans that have been invested in this. Because if you think about it, people like us have been invested in this for a while. We've seen all the films and we've read a number of the books and some of the comics. And we followed some of these characters. It's nice to be able to just jump in and either continue a story that's already been established from another medium or something, or maybe you adapt something, or maybe you focus on a character that, the marketing department's going, what are you doing? Nobody's going to know who this is. Right? I mean, because obviously the marketing department's like, no, we need another Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader story or something like that. And it's like, no, we really don't actually.
Right.
Because you have this whole wealth of characters in this universe that either get zero screen time or attention or very little. That's why we thought Andor was so cool.
Yeah.
And of course, again, not everybody, as David alluded to, not everybody is going to be on board with it. But that's okay. It really is. If you keep producing content regularly, if something doesn't land with somebody, then something else will. Instead, what they're trying to do is they're trying to take these characters, like in the case of Boba Fett, and then you alter it in such a way that the new fans still don't get it. The original fans are up in arms because of what you did to their beloved character. And now nobody likes it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of like, shoot or shoot, in basketball. It's like, if you're a shooter, I expect you to shoot the ball. So it's just like, that's the expectation is that's your job. And so when we get these Star Wars films that's been out, out for a decade or longer, or these franchises that's been out for ages, it's like, okay, the expectation is, okay, I want to see the stuff. We already know the basics or unless you're doing like legitimately an origin story, like Batman Begins. Okay, that makes sense. But if you're doing like, and that was cool because you did like a whole origin, not just like, okay,
right,
his parents died and
exactly.
like 30 years later he decided to wear a bat suit. And you're like,
right.
No,
you really went back to the beginning. Yeah.
You show like him, the League of Shadows and him going through the struggles and learning how to be like, okay, if you want to delve into that, then go deep into it. But the whole skimming the surface of like why he does what he does, we know that already.
Yeah, and that again, I can't stress enough how irritating it is when they start doing things like that, and how I'm glad that it seems cautiously optimistic that Star Wars is starting to move away from that. Because I think that they're finally realizing that the hardcore fans are the ones that are going to keep coming back, no matter how many holes you put in the franchise. Because we're the ones that are always going to be like, well, you know what, this one kind of blew, but maybe the next one will be okay. Whereas the casual fans will just tune out and be like, well, this sucks. Why is everybody all up about this thing? This is terrible. Well, it's because you haven't, grown up with it. I think that if you were to go back and watch the original trilogy, there's a lot of people that might not necessarily have the same love for it, even though it's really good. Because it just wasn't part of their being for 40 or 50 years or whatever the case may be. So they're going to look at it from a different lens, even though it is timeless, and people who are even like 12, 15 years old or whatever still love the original trilogy and sing its praises. Yeah. But that's because it is timeless. And that's the other thing that they're doing now that's so bad, is they're fighting against the timelessness by trying to make it too relevant to today's issues and, just society in general. It's like, no, just leave that out of it and tell a good story and we'll come. So that basically is wrapping up the Tales of the Empire review.
Mm-hmm.
So what's going to be next now? The Acolyte.
Yeah, Acolyte's coming up.
June 4th.
June 4th.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, a couple of weeks.
Early June, yeah. Yeah? Wow, that's true.
Yeah, it's right here, man.
Yeah, it's right here. So pretty much, I know we're probably not going to have a show tomorrow night. Friday, I almost feel like really bad every single time I talk about Friday, because I'm like, every time we do it, then something comes up. But our intent, of course, is always to be live on Friday nights at 11. If not, look for a Sunday. That seems to be the alternate day. And who knows, maybe one of these days we'll just be like, you know what, let's just make it Sunday. But for now, Friday at 11. Should be cool. I'm not really sure though what we're gonna do. Maybe we'll choose another topic from what we had people vote on. Like maybe we'll just take the second most popular topic
Okay.
and do that, or something along those lines. Unless something, of course, pops up. But yeah, we're pretty soon. Maybe next Monday or something. Whatever happens, we'll deal with something else. But then should be at some point our Friday show will actually switch over to the Acolyte review, which should be a lot of fun.
Indeed.
So David finishes this up by saying, at least this treated Coffee like the main character. Andor Season 2 need to treat Andor with the same reverence. Well, I think they might, because what they were trying to do with Andor is give you a little bit of context to the rebellion, because the rebellion really, and that's why maybe calling it Andor could have been a mistake, because really, if you think about it, it's more about what the rebels were doing and how that was building and coming to the point that we see it in Rogue One, but it was told through Andor's eyes, because Andor had to go through his own trajectory to get to the point where he was the rebel that we saw in Rogue One. Because that's the whole idea, he used to be a separatist. The question was, how did he become the rebel that we see in Rogue One? And so obviously in Season 1, he was pretty far away from that. And that's why I think that his storyline seemed to be buried. But if you were really, really up on Rogue One and really understood where all those characters and where the rebellion in general was at in Rogue One, I think you would have looked at it differently. And this season coming up, they're going to do a lot of time jumping. So it's not going to be like over the course of, like a couple of weeks or something. And of course, a lot of Rogue One characters will pop in, like K2SO is going to be in it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that anybody who was like David, that was a little critical of Season 1 of Andor, I think that all the things that we loved about Andor, if they continue that same quality, I think a lot more people are going to jump on board for Season 2, because it should be probably more action-packed, probably more of the familiar characters. I think it might feel a little bit closer to what a lot of people think Star Wars should be.
Yeah, I'm all aboard.
All right. So I guess we will say goodnight on this one. We want to thank you guys again for following us. I know the schedule moving around sometimes gets to be crazy, but you know what? Every time we're here, you guys are here with us. And of course, if you're watching this on the rebroadcast, we're happy to have you too. So don't forget to like this video, hit the subscribe button. You definitely want to hit the notification bell so you know when we're going live, because it does move around. And we thank you guys for supporting us and watching us every week. And hopefully you guys will share these videos with your friends and we can bring more people into the community. So with that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.